Did you know that there's a state of being that shifts your relationship with fear, that allows you to access greater synchronicity and flow, and is the missing key for effective manifestation? I'm not exaggerating. It's pivotal not only in your physical experience, but is absolutely essential for spiritual awakening too. In this episode, we explore what this state of being is, why it's so important, and how to get there. And after the discussion, we get to the most important part. The group frequency calibration associated with this episode is where the frequency work happens and where change actually occurs. So be sure to listen to that. Without releasing distortion patterns targeted by the GFC, the change you want will be more difficult to attain because you haven't addressed the root of the issue. If you like this episode, please help us out by hitting the like button and sharing it with a friend who could use it. It helps us get our content to more people like you. My name is Karen Cheong, and today in Mastering Your World Through Frequencies, we're discussing surrender from strength.
So we're talking about surrender from strength, and to me that's such a funny phrase, right?
Yeah.
To surrender from strength. It kind of messes with my head a wee bit.
Yeah.
So I would love you to tease that out, and what does that actually mean from your perspective?
Sure.
You know?
Yeah, it's a great question because it does sound like they're opposites, isn't it? And that's because in our culture, surrender is usually associated with weakness, right? So it's like you're pinned up against the wall, there's a knife at your throat, you have no choice, you have to surrender.
Yeah.
You know, or if a city's being besieged and by another army and they have no water left and no food left, they fly the white flag, you know, and they surrender.
Yeah.
So it's very associated in our culture with weakness. And what I mean by surrender from strength is that you as an individual have released enough of your distortion, that you're high enough in your vibration, that you are aware of the aspect of you that I call the big S self. Yourself is infinite, indestructible consciousness, that it is aware of your limitlessness.
Right.
So you have faith, or you know that either you will receive what it is that you're hoping for, faith like what you want, and if you don't, that it's there for you as a challenge to transcend, to have you grow, to become stronger internally, to rise in your resonance. So you know that there's a greater perspective than just like your mind, your little ego mind perspective, or what I call the little self.
So just to help us understand a bit better, do you have any real life story? And you know for sure where it would show us what you mean by surrender from strength?
Right. Yeah. So I have a really extreme example, actually. So I have a client who is of Asian descent, and she's very successful. So she is the founder and the manager of a real estate investment trust. Okay, so what they do is they take pool of investors' money and they invest it in properties, and then they get a return.
Yep.
Right. And she's really successful at it. And so she started doing frequency work, and one of her challenges was control, because she's of an Asian background, and so she runs a lot of fear and a lot of control patterns. Her life was very, very structured, organized, and everything was about getting her outcome, because that is her lineage and her cultural patterning. All right, and so part of what her challenge has been is to move into surrender from strength, because it's been really hard for her, because it's really scary for her to be there. And so as she's released her distortion patterns, she's been able to notice that, okay, I'm less triggered. I don't have to be so working all the time because I'm terrified if I don't, then I'm going to have a terrible outcome. She has more free time to be with her kids, all that good stuff. But what happened one day was a really extreme example of this, because she had just gone to one of our workshops, and she was going camping right after this workshop. And so here she is camping with her family, and she's supposed to be wiring in money for another purchase of another property that they're investing in. And it's a few $100,000. So it's not a small amount of money. It's not like $5,000 or even a few $100. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars. And she goes to wire the money and discovers that the money isn't there. And she's like, where the hell is the money?
Oh my God.
And she's sweating it because, they have a contractual obligation to put down this deposit. The seller is waiting. And she realizes what's happened is that one of her senior staff members has made an error and they don't have the money. He's distributed the funds to the investors instead of holding it as the deposit. So now she's sweating because she has, like I said, a contractual obligation, and it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they don't have it. So she and her partner, her business partner, have to figure out, like, how am we going to come up with this money? Because now all the investors have been told we're making this investment with the money that we have pooled, that we now no longer have because of an error that we have made in our team. So what happens is, during this camping trip,
I was going to say, she's
still in camping. Yeah.
Oh
so with her self-perception being crappy, and at the same time, her kids end up getting lice. And then she gets lice. So like all this stuff is happening at the same time. She's like, my God, can this possibly get any worse? So she and her partner decide, okay, they had funds earmarked for something else that they were personally going to receive. And they decide, okay, we're going to put it into the pot. And unfortunately, they have to fire some team members because if not, they don't have enough money.
Yeah.
And these are team members that they're closely connected to and have an emotional connection with. So it's hard because no one knew this was coming. So it's like, oh, and by the way, we have to fire you, you know? So that all happened in order to free up the funds. She ends up going to the bank, like, you know, that she ends up driving like an hour or two to get to a town, to get to a bank. But then the bank is saying, we don't have proof of whoever you are because you're not from this state, you're from somewhere else. She's like totally sweating it. Eventually, after like a sequence of like horrifying days, because she's surrendering, so she's like working with herself. So this is very stressful. She's like, okay, I'm just going to have my emotion. I'm going to surrender to what is. And what happens in the process of surrendering, she allows herself to be vulnerable with her kids. They see their mom freaking out and managing it, which is kind of not something she would ever have allowed herself to do before. She is vulnerable with her husband. She lets herself cry in front of him because she's so freaked out, which she's never allowed herself to do. He holds her when she's crying, so she's allowing herself to be vulnerable. And she's just allowing herself to have the emotions and holding her center and, of course, doing all the actions in the physical world to move things forward. Fast forward, finally it works out. Okay, so the money is deposited, even though the sellers are about to pull out because they're like, where's this money? She finally gets it all done and sorted. And in the process, what happens, which is kind of amazing, is she has a depth of vulnerability with her family that she never had before. Yeah. She allowed herself to be in a space of fear, even though she wasn't sure how it was going to turn out. Yeah. And what's amazing is, at the end of all that, not only does she know that she can be in that level of fear and just move through it, it's actually turned out for the better from a business perspective, because it turns out that now, because the team is smaller in number, she actually can pivot to do different things, and they've reorganized their whole team structure. So she actually now has more time off, and they're spending less money on the team. Wow. So it's kind of this crazy thing that she was like, I did not expect this to happen at all. But in the end, it turned out amazing, because not only did they make the investment, and not only did she have her family unit strengthened and her own sense of like, what can I do, be different, everything turned out better in her business environment as well. Mm-hmm. So when you surrender from strength and you're in that fire of like, oh my God, I'm terrified, I don't know what's going to happen, and it's like really stressful, and she hung with it. She also confirmed the removal of the distortion patterns, and if you don't know what that is, I would recommend watching the episode on confirming the removal as an act of power. Hi guys, I hope you're loving our conversation. Our discussions are designed to empower you to transform your life and the lives of the people around you. So please hit the subscribe button, because it helps us to expand our reach and to empower more people. Okay, let's get back to it.
It sounds like, when you tell the story, it sounds like she didn't surrender. Mm-hmm. It sounds like she did an awful lot of stuff. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And it's like, well, how is that surrendering? Yeah. So where in this story did she do this surrender part that you're talking about, surrendering from strength? Can you talk us through that? Yeah. So all the stuff I told you in the story is the action and what it looked like from the external world. But internally, it was a very different position for her, because before in the past, she ran so much fear and control that she would have been like, okay, we're canceling the camping trip. I'm going to fly back to the office right now. And I'm going to get it all sorted. I'm going to hammer through all the steps that I need to do and get it all done, and like force people, you know what I mean? Like call people up, yell at people, do the things I need to do to get this through, okay? To get what I think the outcome should be. And I'm going to drive to that outcome. In this case, she was like, I can be with this. I don't know why this is happening, which for somebody who ran those other patterns is like a very different internal stance. Yeah. So it's like, okay,
I don't know why this is happening, but I can be with my own fear. I can work through it, which is an internal thing, right? Someone outside couldn't necessarily see it.
Yeah.
She had to have her emotion. She was doing a process that I call confirming the removal. So she was confirming the removal of her own fear, of her need to control, of her resistance to surrendering. She was also listening to group frequency calibrations on the surrender from strength. So she was moving through her internal work. So even though on the outside you'd be like, oh, well, she did a lot of stuff anyway, it was different things that she chose to do other than what she would have done in the past.
Right.
So that's the hard bit.
So what I'm hearing from what you're saying, because really anybody watching this is going to say, why do we care?
Yeah.
You know, why do I have to surrender for strength? Isn't my mind strong enough to make this happen? I mean, I can kind of hope most people are like, yeah, no, I'd rather have a better ending than what my mind thinks. But why is it so important then for us to practice that surrender from strength? Because it sounds like a practice.
It is a practice. Yeah. And what I'll say before I launch into why it's important is that a lot of people will think I have to do this perfectly in order for it to work.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it is a process, and it becomes easier as you release more of your distortion patterns and as your vibrational level rises. It doesn't have to be as intense as what that woman experienced, but it is a process. So just as you say, it's a practice and a process of releasing, and becomes less intense over time.
Okay, so I have two questions. Yeah. Can I ask them?
Yeah.
Okay, so why was it so intense for her?
Yeah, because it was so scary, and she had so much fear, and she had to not choose to succumb to the fear, in the sense of instead of like coming at the fear with control of like, okay, I've got to get it sorted. I need to like manage all this stuff to make sure that I feel safe and go into overdrive, like take my family out on vacation, do all this stuff. So I feel like I'm in control, whether or not I am or not. That is hard, because what she had to do was stay with her fear, in the sense that, okay, it's really terrifying for me to feel this fear right now. Like, I could lose my company. I could be sued. I could be, I don't know, like I have a fiduciary obligation to my clients and I'm not fulfilling, right? Whatever it is, to be like, okay, I'm going to breathe, right? And be okay with the fact that I'm terrified, because I am. And to continue to surrender into, I don't know why this is happening, but I'm going to meet this challenge in a way that's softer, in the sense of like, I'm going to do my best in response, but I'm not going to go into that overdrive of fear and control.
Right.
Right? And that's the hard bit.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand that. Okay. And then the second question is about the practice.
Yeah.
So why is it that when we practice this, or the surrendering, that it gets easier?
Yeah. It gets easier because what happens is you start to recognize that when you're in surrender, things resolve in a way that is surprising often. Like you didn't expect that thing to sort in a way that is better than you would have anticipated. Or you recognize that you can relax because something other than just your mind has your back. It's here for you to grow from, and you start to trust that. It's not just you hoping that, please God, let that be true. It actually starts to happen over and over again. And so you recognize, wait a minute, if I surrender here, something else that's greater than me can happen, that can help me not only grow, but also strengthen and experience things that are better than what I expected or what I could even have imagined.
Okay, so I think what I'm also hearing with that is that, okay, the outcome might not look that great, but when you've practiced enough to surrender from strength, the understanding when you meet the challenges that it's not against you.
Yes.
It's for you.
Yes, exactly.
And that in that moment, it's a moment of transcending whatever that challenge is.
Exactly.
Like you say, it might not always work out the way you want it to work out.
Yes.
But it might work out the way it needs to work out.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the other thing that I mentioned sort of casually in that story was she knew that she could be in that level of fear. I'm not saying she wanted to be. I'm not saying she has to be forever. But like she was strong enough to hold her center despite all that fear. Like she herself could transcend it. Before, she was terrified of that fear. She wouldn't even allow herself to feel it. That's why she had so much control. But it's like now she's like, man, I just did that.
Yeah.
So I can hold my center and be okay with what's happening and move through it in a way that I didn't before. So even though she didn't have all the resolution exactly yet in that moment when she was in the fire, she knows now she has so much strength. Like as a person, she's like, and you can't take that from her now. She's just like, I know what I'm able to do. And before, I was so terrified I couldn't. I tried to like manage everything.
Yeah.
So I never went there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the take home then for that is what you're saying is when we practice this through like doing the confirming the removal and do we have other GFCs?
Yeah. So there's a whole surrender from strength deep dive. And also if you watch Mastering Momentum, the 6 core essentials where I teach the 6 most essential tools for empowering yourself to have your own spiritual awakening and also your best life. One of the 6 core essentials is surrender from strength.
Yeah.
Because it's so important.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we do that, when we practice that, that helps us to raise resonance. And in so doing, prepares us for whatever.
Yes.
Basically.
Exactly.
Right?
And you release your distortion patterns that keep you from being able to surrender from strength, that keeps you in fear, that keeps you in self-doubt, that keeps you in like resistance. Because once you release those distortion patterns, you can relax more easily into surrender from strength because now you're cultivating this higher vibrating order because you've released those distortion patterns. You have more of a connection with your big S self. So everything becomes easier. I know it sounds weird, like why would listening to these things make a difference? But it really shifts because we're working in this new paradigm way where when you release the distortion patterns that cause that resistance, cause the fear, it literally, your response is totally different because your emotions, your thoughts, all that stuff changes.
Yeah. And I can imagine, I'm imagining it happens faster.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
The more practice you get at it, the more you can, it becomes habitual to like surrender from strength and go, all right, there's nothing I can do anymore. This is it. I'm going to have to traverse this.
Yes.
And I'll be fine.
Yes.
Whatever happens, I will be fine.
Yeah.
I'm imagining that happens faster.
Yes, much, much faster. And because, like you said, you have more of this sense of, I'm going to be okay. And you don't necessarily know how.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And I think when people begin, that's terrifying because you're like, how am I going to be okay? It doesn't make any sense. Like, what possibly could happen to make this okay?
Yeah.
And the thing is, when you are in the perspective of the little s self, of the ego mind, you have a very limited perspective. And you're also limited by your distortion patterns in terms of like the possibilities that you even see.
Yeah.
But once you break through those distortions and you release them, like literally I've seen people like shift in their perspective from before when they had the group frequency calibration to after. Like literally, I've seen people go from, I'm terrified, I'm gonna lose my job, I need to like get everything sorted so I can like get out of this thing, to actually, no, I'm empowered, I can be in my center, I can see more possibilities, I have more options than I thought I did, and they move into something better.
Also just gonna add there, it's oftentimes you can't even see it coming.
Yes.
The better stuff is just appears.
Yeah.
Like I have a story.
Yeah.
Of a friend that did your surrender from strength deep dive.
Yeah.
She was going through a rough time, and I said, "You got to do the deep dive."
Yeah.
Literally within 24 hours, there was a job offer, and then 2 days later, the house they were renting was too expensive because they were running out of money.
Yeah.
Somebody said to her, "Would you like to move into my house?" Which was like 10,000 pesos less than what she's already paying. This all happened in 1 week.
Wow.
I know. She did the same thing. She went, wow! Like, yeah, this is real. This frequency work is real, people.
So she paid 10,000 less for a better house?
Bigger.
Yeah. Wow.
With a bigger garden.
So she got a job offer and a better house. That's awesome.
Yeah. She keeps pinching herself. If ever she had a doubt, she doesn't anymore.
That's awesome. Yeah. So the thing is, I think you asked me this question like a long time ago, which was, why is surrender from strength important? So what I'll say is it's first an internal thing, which is a really big deal.
Yeah.
Okay. Because what happens, you stop fighting everything.
Yeah.
You stop being in resistance and stop being terrified that if you're not micromanaging every single detail in your life, somehow something terrible is going to happen. That's what I was like. You know, I was like, I'm just going to control every aspect of my business, my relationships, everything so that I feel safe.
Yeah.
And once you start to release the distortion patterns that keep you from surrender from strength and start to deepen it, honestly, it feels like you have so much space. Like you actually relax. It's kind of, I know that might not seem like a really big deal, but for those of you guys who have a lot of fear and control issues, relaxing is like a really big deal.
Oh, yeah.
Part of the surrender from strength process is to like get yourself into your center so that you can relax into this place which is very stable and which feels very soothing to us because we're in the present moment of space and time. Now, if you don't know what the 0 point is, I'd recommend watching episode 151. But that surrender from strength methodology is kind of tied in with things like going and doing really hard workouts because that brings you into your center. So the more in your center you are, the more you're able to surrender from strength.
Yeah.
And the more you deepen in your surrender from strength, the more you're in your center. It's kind of, they're interrelated, which is why they're both part of the 6 core essentials of mastering momentum. So one more thing I just want to add before you ask me whatever you're going to ask me next is, so not only do you feel more ease, okay, when you surrender from strength, and which is a huge gift, you also feel more centered. It's really critical for spiritual awakening to be in surrender from strength because control and fear come from the ego mind.
Yes.
Okay. And it's like I'm resisting all of life because I'm afraid of it and I'm afraid of what the outcome might be. But in order to spiritually awaken, you need to be in surrender from strength in order to allow for that flow, allow yourself to know that greater aspect of you, that big S self, in order to feel that connection with the oneness. In order to have all that stuff, you can't be fighting your way to it. You really have to be in this surrender from strength because it's really not about you and your little ego mind. It has to do with this greater aspect of yourself that you're remembering. So if you want to have spiritual awakening, surrender from strength is a really critical part of that process.
That makes me wonder what we're going to do for the GFC.
Yes. So for this GFC, what we're going to be doing is starting to clear some of the distortion patterns that keep you from entering surrender from strength.
Whoa, okay, yeah, let's do it now.
So for those of you who would like to release some of those distortion patterns that are keeping you from entering the surrender from strength state, then I highly recommend listening to the group frequency calibration meditation associated with this episode. And if you know someone in your life who may or may not be a control freak and who could really use help from this episode, then please share it with them. We're about to start the Group Frequency Calibration, or GFC, where we actually do the frequency work and change is catalyzed. To get to the GFC, click on the square that'll appear on the right or the link in the description below. It's time to bring in a new experience, a new consciousness, and a new world. Let's rise together.